Hello and welcome to Enjoy the Wonder. I'm Eunjee.
I'm Jun Hee.
I'm Matt.
Oh, we got Matt at the beginning of the show.
Whoa,
What is happening right now?
I feel like my name doesn't vibe as well as Eunjee and Jun Hee.
Matty.
Yeah, maybe next time.
It's been a crazy week, guys, here in Texas. How have you guys
to
been?
say the least.
Yeah.
For all of y'all who don't know, Texas has been under a snowstorm this past week, or the effects of a snowstorm. On Monday, it actually snowed, and then we lost power and water for myself for at least almost a week now, or not now, but almost a week. I didn't have power until Thursday, and then water came back yesterday, which is Saturday.
Yeah.
So,
and for us, it was kind of like rolling outages here and there. After the first day, we had nothing, and then it was on and off. And it's been very stressful, and I've been processing a lot because I was just shocked at how unprepared our state always seems to be with certain things like this. And then, like leadership, like Ted Cruz just gonna go
peacing out. Bye.
Okay. I mean, I don't even think we really received the worst. Like we, as like Matt and I, like with Jaden, but even we were so worried about the warmth of Jaden. I can't even imagine like people out there that were really, really struggling. And just to think that this guy would use his children as an excuse to whatever his reasoning just angers me as I think about it more. All to say the least, we are safe, we are sound, we are grateful for that. Yesterday, Texas decided to come up and show us some beautiful weather as if this week is like not even real.
Yeah.
But that's how the state is for you. And I think one thing we wanted to talk about was actually the recent rise in Asian American hate crimes in America. I know a lot of us have been seeing on social media stats like anti-Asian hate crimes are now increased 1,900%. So that's not 900, that's 1,900% increase in hate crimes against Asian Americans. This time last year, the coronavirus obviously was originating from Wuhan, China, and that did kind of dominate our everyday conversations. So with this rise of cases also showed a rise of fear, and that also led to a rise of racism. I thought it would be kind of just a good space for us to share maybe what that has looked like in our lives, because even though there has been a huge increase of how this has affected Asian American communities this past year, especially, it's not like Asian American racism just started this year, right? And I think the fact that there are conversations about it, there is awareness being brought to light about things that a lot of us do face on the daily. I wanted to create this space so that we could process things that we might have gone through in our past, and also for you guys to also wonder, like, if it's not blatant racism, like things that they've gone through. People were stabbed, a woman was thrown acid at her, Asian American businesses were looted, a lot of elderly Asian Americans were targeted, right? These are a lot of blatant things that have been happening, but a lot of us sometimes don't have those blatant experiences. However, we still have a story that needs to be brought to light about how we have also been affected.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think, obviously it's been really heartbreaking and difficult to see just because it kind of doesn't make any sense. Just like old Asian Americans just getting like attacked and even killed in some circumstances. I think it just reminded that even like that even hate is trendy. Like, I feel like people latch on to something, and we're just such like a broken society that even hate and violence is something that's easily latched onto. And as soon as it became like the thing to target vulnerable Asian Americans, I think it blows up because that's just the next thing, the next trend that people do. And to see it, brought upon for such like a silly, nonsensical reason. I think this is still largely tied to COVID, but I doubt that the people who are doing this even identify like fear of COVID as a factor. It's just something that they can be a part of in a really, disgusting way. Yeah. And I think you mentioned before that, we might not have these blatant experiences of something this violent, but I think this idea of hating people that are different than the norm and the mainstream is something that has always existed. in this country in particular. And I think, it would be interesting to hear the more subtle ways that's been kind of demonstrated through y'all's lives and my own too.
Subtle ways, a term that is microaggressions, guys, that I have learned actually late this year. But yeah, I agree with you. One thing that a lot of people say is just like amplify and share our stories. And so I wanted to have us share any instances we might have had and we feel compelled to bring to the mic. Would anyone like to go first?
I'd be interested in hearing you guys talk first as someone or two people who have a full identity as Asian and Korean American. I think just listening to that before I kind of go into my own time of sharing would be helpful for me to even start out with.
Racial identity in itself has been something that I have been processing a lot. The older I have gotten, growing up, I don't think race was something I particularly noticed often, even though we grew up. I think the times I noticed was maybe at the mall or when my mom was trying to return something, and sometimes the customer service was so incredibly rude. So those were times I did note, like, why are they being so rude to us and talking down and like slowing their words, stuff like that. But besides that, I don't really feel like I was aware of a lot of things. And it wasn't until I joined Teach for America where they have us kind of reflect and think about race in a more deeper lens, which started to make me uncomfortable and realize, growing up, I had a lot of close white friends in elementary school. And then once we went to middle school, just somehow naturally, I had a lot of Asian friends, and then they were still all friends together. And I realized when I had to reflect through TFA, that was a big part of when I saw race subconsciously be a part of me now. And, I have no Asian friends now, and my white friends don't want to hang out with me, which is okay. It's not like they were being racist, but almost like just naturally going to for a clique of kind. I don't know. And so that was something that I think really affected me. And that's when, things like Josephine versus Eunjee became more of a subconscious differentiation of who I was. When in elementary, I didn't even think twice whenever I was Josephine or Eunjee in different settings. And so I think with that, I started to think about my role as an educator in the inner city, where in Teach for America as a 2013 core member, the stat was 6% of core members were Asian American. And that's actually a very small percentage. So even though I knew I was doing work that was really important, I was also part of a minority in this group where the conversations we were having to support our Black and Brown students and also being around Black and Brown educators, I didn't know where my place was in that conversation. I almost felt voiceless. But I also didn't want it to be about me and my voice when we were fighting this greater cause together. I didn't let myself really think about that too much. But I also realized that stripped away my understanding of how to be an ally as well. Not only just like for me, my own, but also how to be an ally to my peers and my students. And so that was something I've been recently realizing today. But in terms of racism, I guess I noticed some like ignorant remarks in the classroom with my students. And I think in those settings, I was always able to stop them and kind of have conversations, because even if for me, I don't think I took personal offense, it was a good teaching moment for my students in that were from Burma or refugees from different Asian countries that were coming here to Dallas at that time, and how to make them understand that that could be really hurtful or really offensive, and how we could have teaching moments, because I think they also were never around Asian American adults in general to learn those things. And so I always liked how I was able to put that into my classroom, even if I didn't know necessarily how to speak up about it with adults in certain conversations. And so I did feel empowered to play a little part. I think once I stopped being an educator and I don't want to say any names, I worked somewhere in Houston for 2 years, and I was under the leadership of a boss who was incredibly degrading to me as an Asian American. I think when I reflect on it now, it took a lot of who I was and like really made me just angry at how I felt like I couldn't speak up when they were microaggressions to who I was. And so things like, we would have conversations, and then she would talk to me about how, like, she had a meeting with this Asian American doctor. And one time I came to work early, and the doctor was leaving, and she pulls me aside and she goes, "You would understand because you're also like quiet and shy, right?" And I was just like, "He's just so quiet and shy, and you would understand." And it's just like things like that. You think it's just like, I don't know in English, but the term like in Korean, like oyopso, that you're hearing, like you're like,
It's like unfair.
yeah. I guess I was just like, what? Like, I don't even know how to respond in that moment. Or I got LASIK, right? And everyone just like, "Oh my gosh, how do you feel about LASIK at work?" And then for like literally the whole week, she would just look at me. And she was, I just can't get used to that. And like, it was in a way where I don't, like, all the coworkers knew it was because of my eyes and that I'm Asian, and that she was just like so shocked that I have LASIK and something is different about me. Something is just so different, right? And it was just like things like that where she really played a race card a lot. And even her and like another attending would call me like the smartest person. And then one time they had this project with Excel, and they just knew that I would be the best one for it. And I'm like, how in the world would you know that I, honestly, the lowest in hierarchy in this office 5, right? Like, why do you automatically assume I would be the smartest in this, right? And even in those things, it has to do with my race and my identity. And I think something that always made me mad about this is because even when she called me in her office to talk about certain things like PTA meetings that she's had at her school, and she would be like, "It's unfair. Like, honestly, the colored parents are having reverse discrimination against us." And in those moments, because it was an all-yops moment, or like, is this really happening right now? I didn't know what to say. And so I just allowed a lot of remarks like that happen without then just questioning her. Like, why do you think this is okay to call reverse discrimination? Or why do you think I would understand this Asian doctor just because of my race as well? Or what you think I am as a timid person versus who I really am? And that was a huge reason as to why I didn't want to go back to this place after having Jaden. But then it was remote work, so I also felt like that would be a better space. But I remember like talking to my friend Sonia or my sister, and like trying to have conversations so that I could be like, okay, if this happens again, like what would I say in this situation, so that I can be more empowered to speak up and know that these things are not okay. As we were learning more for everyone. I don't know. I'm still kind of processing it. But what I do know is I let her talk down on me and make me feel like a timid, obedient, not talkative person. When, if you know me, that's not who I am. But I felt like that became my identity because that was the almost like model minority identity that Asian Americans have in the face of white people.
Mm.
There were also remarks you said about other coworkers who were of other races, but these were just the ones that were directly towards me. Yeah.
I mean, I think that like when you were talking about TFA, I think that for me resonated a lot, because when I joined the Corps in San Antonio, it was even smaller. I was
That's true.
one of 4 Asian Americans joining the Corps in TFA at San Antonio that year. 3 of us were guys. There was one woman, and by the end of there were 4 guys at the beginning of the year, and by the end of the first semester, I was like the only one left, out of the guys. And so,
they all left.
Yeah, they all left for one reason or another, or got fired. Yeah, and I think thinking back on it, like each person had their own reasons, right? But what I really felt during my time in San Antonio was this feeling of, I don't belong here. Like this feeling of being in a strange city, being in a strange place where all of a sudden the culture that I'm used to is not the norm anymore, right? And I think when someone gets put into that situation and then also has to go through like a pretty difficult 2 years, it just becomes that much harder, right? And I think no one ever said like it's because we're Asian American, or no one ever said it's because like I'm Asian and that's why I'm quitting, you know? But thinking back on it and reflecting, like that feeling of otherness, I feel like can lead to a lot of like identity crises, right? And feeling out of place or feeling not belonging and forcing us out almost. Yeah. And so when you were talking about TFA, I think I resonated a lot with that. Just because I never ended up really connecting with TFA folks. The two TFA people in San Antonio who are Asian happened to find each other. Like
love?
No. I meant like the two of us.
Oh,
not love, but
love you as a bro.
But you know, I think that for me played a big part of my time in San Antonio, and I think ultimately contributed to not really feeling like a part of the core in ways that other folks whom are here really connected. And there's a lot of other reasons too,
right?
That probably contributed to that. But I think looking back and reflecting, like that's probably like a bigger piece that I didn't think about until later after.
Yeah. What about other instances? Do you have any that you might have reflected on?
Yeah. So I think my situation is unique because I grew up in the Bay Area where it's actually majority Asian. And I grew up right at around the time where it was starting to become more Asian. And now it's actually like majority Asian. But back then it was still like pretty heavily, I would say like 50-50 white, maybe leaning more white when I first came to the States in 97. And so but as I grew up in high school and stuff, I went to a private school. And so the school that I went to was like predominantly Asian, I would say, like, I actually don't know the official stats, but looking back on it, I would think like 60% Asian American, 30% white, and then like 10%, probably not even 10%, you know, like 5% maybe Black and Latinx. And I think growing up in that kind of environment, I think gave me a lot of privilege because I didn't have to deal with a lot of the, like you mentioned, like microaggressions or the just feeling of otherness that you might have felt, that I might have felt if I had grown up somewhere else. Right. And so I think that for me growing up in the Bay Area and Cupertino was a huge privilege for me. And so I just never really like felt anything weird at all, like growing up. Like there was one time my friends actually paid me to for me to give them my lunch because like they wanted to eat my lunch.
Yeah. I've never had lunch struggles.
Yeah. Like someone paid me like 25 cents for like one like roll, like kimbap, right? And so that was just like, yeah, that's just life in the Bay. And I think going to Rice was a similar situation because it's a pretty diverse campus. And so I was able to find my community. And it's like one of those things where because I grew up in the Bay Area, I realized like I never really learned how to like interact with non-Asian people that well. And what I also figured out later is that it's much easier for me to interact with other people of color than it is for me to interact with like white people.
Me too.
Yeah.
That's going to be my next question because I know that's true for Eunjee. And I don't know if you find yourself often in circumstances where you actually have the opportunity to, in a social circumstance, to be around white people, but yeah, how you feel like, or I don't know why, now that you already said you are less comfortable, I don't know, like why do you feel like that is?
I don't know exactly why. I think part of it is almost this pressure of having to like fit in somehow.
It's like a power dynamic because in like a power way, I feel like, you know, the white person has a level of power inherently that maybe you don't feel, and this is just me kind of guessing, maybe you don't feel around other minorities. I don't know. Is it something like that?
I think so, because I feel like I think part of it is I feel like I have to meet this standard of culture around other white people that I don't necessarily have to around other people of color, right? And I don't feel this need to, my culture is just my culture. People may not understand it, but like other people of color will understand that sometimes we have to like code switch and adapt. Yeah. Whereas someone who has grown up in a culture like where it's built around them, like they don't have to ever do that, right? And so I think that part of it kind of contributes to that a little bit. I mean, like my time at Rice was great, like I loved, like I had white friends, I had Asian friends, but ultimately I think I found my comfort group, like my comfort zone, like with other Asian Americans. Something I've thought about a lot since, and I go to an Asian American church. I mostly hang out with Asian Americans now. And so it's something that I think about day to day about, like, I wonder what life would have been like if I had grown up somewhere else, or if I had other friend groups, if I think back to one experience that I can think of, I was at DSW, the designer shoe warehouse, with my family. This was after I had left for college, but I was back home in the Bay Area in Cupertino, and we were just out like as a family shopping for shoes. And this lady like cut our family in line, and my brother, he was just like, "Hey, like you cut, like, there's a line." And then without any hesitation, she just like got mad and angry. And then she was like, "Why don't you just go back to the country you came from?" And I was just like, what the heck? Like, where did that come from? And I think that for me was a weird mix of feelings of, one, being like, why is she so mad? Maybe because she's embarrassed she got caught or something. And two, like, why did she pull this race card out of nowhere? And for me, like, growing up in the Bay Area, I always assumed that like people knew, and it's something that they were used to. But I think that for me was surprising. And third, I think the reactions of our family members was very interesting. I think. Oh yeah.
How was it?
So I don't know. My brother's going to listen to this. He's the technical editor of our podcast, but he instantly went, like offensive mode. He was like, he got mad. You can't say that. Like, he went off. And then I was the one to be like, no, it's okay. Just like back off. It's fine. It's fine. I didn't like hold him back, but I just like got physically closer to him. So he's not like the physical type, but I just wanted to make sure he was okay, and I think for me in that moment, it was very interesting the way that our reactions came out. And I think I instantly adopted this, like, I'm not gonna, like, it was a weird moment of like, I don't want to let this person like ruin, this moment. Whereas my brother had the opposite reaction of like, no, I'm going to fight back, And so I think that like resonates in my head a lot in those moments where I think back now of, I wonder why things played out that way. And, so I think that was one of the big moments that I can think of. And honestly, like, I don't think about it too much these days because it doesn't really.
How do you feel? Because the cases, or not the cases, but the stories of late is in California, or like Bay Area, right? Like, it's actually your area.
Yeah. So honestly, like, I don't know why those cases are rising, especially out in the Bay Area, right? And I can't assume anything, but one of the things that my personal theories is when someone who has power is threatened and that power is being taken away in a very visible way. And you think about the Bay Area and you think about the Asian majority population out there, it also, like, our race suddenly becomes a symbol of like, oh, here's all these Asians coming into our country, taking our tech jobs, taking our like land, like space and all these things. And you notice that it's all of our elderly, vulnerable people, right? People that can be like taken advantage of, right? And so it's like, I have no basis, but that's, if you think about people who in the past have gotten the like brunt of the attacks, it's folks who have like been able to get power or make a living for themselves, or in societies where like white power is no longer the dominant power, like there's always this like pushback, and so it's probably like in areas where there's a lot more Asian American folks out there where it becomes like, oh, this person is a symbol for all these bad things that are happening. So this is my chance to lash out, I think that's my personal theory. And it's just, I think the way that I've processed it, but it's weird lately. I think with all these stories coming out, I've kind of distanced myself from them a little bit in a way. I haven't really, I know it's out there. I've read the stories and stuff, but it's been hard for me to kind of dive into those, I think, because of like everything that's been going on. It just feels like, and I have a lot of privilege in being able to say that, like, I'm choosing to distance myself from those stories because of everything going on. And so it's been an interesting time.
And I feel like there have been comments of like, if you're not saying something, then you're part of the problem or stuff like that. And while I get the sentiment or like why people feel like that, this is literally for me the first time I feel like I'm seeing little Asian American hate crimes or racism being brought to light. And it's a lot to process and a lot to actually think about. And so not saying you don't ever have to speak or stuff like that, but I think it's just a place where I would just encourage people to just reflect and process too, for like almost some of us, like the first time in our lives, rather than feeling like we have to, I don't know. I feel like it's also like this fear of like, what do I say? Or like, because this has never happened where Asian Americans almost have a platform to share stories, but how does that even work or look like? Or I don't know. Or even like, was it racism? Because a lot of the things I think about are just like microaggressions. So then it's like, well, was it racism or was I being sensitive? Or one time in college, I remember I don't know if I've shared it here before, but it was like UT has a UGS class. So it's like a global studies course. And I was in it and there's 300 students in that class. So it's like a huge class. It's at 8 a.m., but you only have 8 a.m. option. And so y'all know I'm not a morning person. So I am slouched back, right? But I'm just slouched back. I'm writing my notes, slouched a little bit. And the professor runs towards me and he's like, if you want to sleep in my class, like get out, right? And I was just like, I was looking around because like, who is he talking to? And he was like staring straight at me and yelling at me. And I was like, oh, I wasn't sleeping. But he was like yelling at me, no, get out of my class right now. And I was just like so embarrassed. And I was like, I wanted to obey in that moment for some reason. And he was a white male professor, right? And I was just like, okay. And I left. And it was this embarrassing moment. And I actually never went back to the class. Besides Fridays, we had smaller, intimate discussions. And so I was more comfortable in that setting. And I like shared, oh yeah, I was the one yelled at and kicked out. And I was like, but I wasn't even sleeping. Like I was just slouched back. And they're like, that is, you need to report that. And I was like, well, I mean, like maybe he just thought I was like, but I was like, I was typing and everything. He's like honestly, that's because you slouched back and your eyes might not have been fully, like they were like, I know it sounds rude, but it was like, and even in that, I'm like, oh my gosh, like those are actual cases where it's like, those are subtle things you don't realize, but those are attacks as well. And it's like, I don't know, it really made me scared in those moments. And my Asian obedience side did come out in the face of white power, right? And like, how would I respond in my sudden desire, like you said, that pressure to obey or pressure to live up to something. And so like silencing other parts. When I was like, I know I wasn't sleeping and I'm a really fast typer. So I was just literally typing like this, but I don't know. And then I was like, maybe I should have been slouching, but it was like, I don't know. Anyways, but then I asked, was that racism? Is that something to talk about? And I think a lot of times, a lot of us have those questions of, was it even racism if it wasn't the blatant ones that are like, go back to your country, So I think as I talk about that, though, something I am interested, and I think that's why I enjoy your addition, Matty's addition to this podcast is, Matt, you do have a privilege, right, of being perceived as a white male. However, you are half, right? Half Korean, half American, but just fully biracial and fully each. And I think I even do a good job of encouraging that out of you. I think sometimes I even think it's like a defense mechanism that I have rooted behind my like white culture power mindset. But I wanted to like ask, like, how have you been able to shape your identity as your biracial identity, and how that has shaped who you are in your experiences?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I mean, I mentioned on the first one that I don't have, I feel like, a strong internal racial identity. Like I have a strong, I would say, like spiritual and even social and personal identities. But I guess that's the privilege that you're talking about, is that I have over time, my whole life, been very good at morphing my identity to meet the social circumstance around me, which is interesting because I could like change it, on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, that's probably why I never felt like the need to, I guess, identify strongly like with a race or with a racial identity. Because I had a close group of Asian friends through most of pre-college schooling, who was probably my closest consistent group. But then I also, mainly through sports, but really just through growing up, in one neighborhood my whole childhood, had plenty of white friends as well that I spent a lot of time with. So those worlds were kind of separate, and actually they even intermingled in terms of some close friends in both were good friends with each other. So like in a day-to-day circumstance, it didn't really clash. I think looking back, more so it's when I went to like social gatherings. So whether it was like parties or like sports events, or in the stands at a football game or something, where I was kind of surrounded by a lot of people, then it's almost like I didn't really have to externally choose, but in my internally, I could feel myself being like, okay, well, in this setting, I should let more of my white side out because it just seemed more appropriate. It's kind of I just did it naturally. Because I think Asian in particular, I mean, maybe it just goes into that model minority kind of viewpoint, but I think that plays into it's like the less socially received or socially popular, I guess, group you could say, especially in high school and middle school. So, well, if I want to maximize where I'm at socially in this party, then let's bring out the white side a little bit more. And I think looking back, I definitely did that. I was probably more hesitant to be seen as an Asian person whenever I was around people that were outside of my core friend groups, I guess. So I guess the question is why is that? And I think that goes into those probably microaggressions and kind of inherent racial tensions that, Asians are viewed differently, and even my best friends were viewed differently. And none of us got bullied, none of us got picked on. I mean, we were kind of well received everywhere, but there was definitely a difference in the hierarchy, I guess, of if you're pursuing to be fitting in with the people that everyone back then wanted to fit in with. It was hard to do that, I think, in a Asian crowd. Unless I think of the Asians who were in that, they completely were separate from any sort of Asian identity. They were pretty much white people. So yeah, that I hadn't really thought much about, but now that I do, because I still, 99% of my friend group now is Asian, and college, I just went into that crowd, and I, in a weird way, I think am way less comfortable now. If I were in a white social gathering than I would have been 10 years ago. But I think now it's because this identity has been practiced so much. It's my everyday now that, it's probably easier to see the difference in the other side, because now, maybe not culturally, but for sure socially and in every other way, I identify as an Asian person now. But yeah, so I guess all in all, it's easier for me to see the difference between something that in the past I just kind of walked back and forth over that line from one side to the other very naturally, depending on where I was or who I was around. So yeah, it was a good thing for me to think back on, especially now that to some extent have established a new identity over the past probably 12, 13 years.
I have questions, Steve. Okay, I have two so far. My first question is, as you said, right, there was privilege in deciding which identity to use in certain settings, right? That's not saying anything against how you chose to do that as someone that was just trying to figure out your social identity as well. But with our son, Jaden, right, who is also biracial, right? And that's something I love about our family. And, he has, for me, I know there's part of me that I want him to love Korean culture and like grow up, but also I want him to own who he is fully, right? And I think I would love to know, like, how would you, like, how do you think that would be something you would help him navigate, like that dual identity or biracial identity?
So kind of like two sides of that. So one, I want him to be very exposed to like I don't want his inherent friend group to be like all Korean or just like immersed in, not saying I don't want him to go to like a Korean American church. That's fine. But I want him to have every opportunity, like socially, just to get like to know and people of different cultures and experience. So I mean, it's like I really value the public school system because I think you get that a lot more, like a more diverse crowd. And, I want him to be well traveled with us and just to see that there are a lot of like really good people that look all different ways. I think it's like experientially, I want him to like be comfortable with all racial groups. I think on the other side of that though, I want like very intentional conversations to be had about what his racial background is and like the customs that maybe we had or that his grandparents had, so that he knows the identities that shaped, I guess, who he is now. So it's kind of different. Like I don't feel like I want to push him into or like make sure that he finds this social group that's like specifically of a certain race or something. But I do want to make sure he's not ignorant. Like me, like growing up, I was pretty ignorant. I knew like the very basic traditions of Korean American or like being Korean and stuff. But, it's half of who I am. And all in all, I had a very ignorant understanding, I think, of what it is to be like a Korean person. So I think conversations, not just conversations, but actual experiences to get him that like, things that you did growing up, to like celebrate Korean like traditions or holidays or foods. Yeah, I did some of those too, or like foods. Like I want to introduce those to him. So that's kind of like two sides of the coin, like exposures and socially and what that looks like versus what we do intentionally as like a family and having him aware of those things. But yeah, identity, this might peek off on a little tangent, but I think identity for me still to this day, it's important to know and understand. But I do think that like as someone develops their own identity, especially their identity in like Christ and things like that, it allows them to see things even beyond like their ethnic identity. And I think that can expand into like their social circumstances and how they interact with people of any race and like how he loves on people and the friends he has. I feel like I'm kind of hedging, but to me, there's a little bit of both.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like there's like this balance of owning his own heritage, right? And owning his own identity, but also not letting that limit him, right? I feel like that's what you're talking about.
I think that's a good way to put it. Because I do think anything can be pushed to an extent where it becomes something that's actually like prevents you maybe from. I can think of many circumstances where something as important as cultural and ethnic identity actually becomes more important and valued than like a spiritual identity and like your identity of what you just do as like a God-fearing, like loving, kind person. And I think that's a boundary that I don't want. And I don't think that would get there, but yeah.
I think that's something I was feeling too as I was thinking about all this is I think in 2021 and 2020, race has become even just like forever in this world history. Like race has always been maybe one of the most talked about like important identities, but ultimately at the end of the day, I think for us, like there's something bigger than that, Yeah. And so I think as you were talking about that, I think that resonated a lot with me. Just not letting this become bigger than it needs to be.
Yeah, I think there's one
comment. I think it's becoming bigger than it needs to be, though. I feel like we're just having this conversation.
No, I'm not saying like the fact that we're having this conversation is like that. But
because I agree, like I agree with everything you guys both said about, ultimately we want to teach our children, we want to teach everyone to have that higher identity of Christ fearing and loving, right? But I think my question was still like, just in the place of Jaden having a potential privilege of being a perceived white male, right? Like that might be a privilege he has because I don't know, who knows? He could look like a white male in the future, right? Even if he is right, because you look more Asian as a baby, and then and so I think that's just something that was my question, was just like, how would we just let him not leverage privilege in that way of like, oh, in this setting, I'm gonna pull out white card or not. Right. Like, well, of course, the Christ fearing is what we would hope to instill, like in this day and age, like we still have to teach our children what is race in a very tangible way, so that that is even something that can share the love of Christ in a way that is spoken to people who receive it in a language of race. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the practical way I would do that is try to make him proud of like the Korean customs and traditions that there are. So like I would kind of dread like putting on the hanboks and stuff. I like getting the money on New Year's, but I would dread doing it. I thought they kind of like looked funny and they were kind of uncomfortable. So I didn't like wearing them for long. I also had this like irrational fear of buttons, and they still had those little things. But yeah, but I think like we do have the ability to make him like proud and like eager to participate in those. And I would think those would have a natural way of making him more excited about being Korean and like always wanting to identify as, 3/4 Korean, instead of trying to hide that for like this more like quote unquote preferred racial identity of being white in certain circumstances. But, beyond that, I think he kind of forms his own deal, and, hopefully he's comfortable everywhere. And I think most of it's on him, but we do have our role in like making him proud and excited to partake in the food we eat and the customs that Korean people have and those kinds of things.
So something else that was my second question was, I heard you, like, and I agree, you have like 95% of your closer friends, right, are Asian American. And a lot of us view you as our token white guy friend, right? Like that's just like kind of like in a joke or in that way, right? And so I'm curious, how do you feel about that when that is something that is just like, lightly said? We all know you are a wonderful halfie, and you've had your own experiences as well. Like I know sometimes I'm like, oh well, Matt hasn't done this. Well, we've actually shared a lot of customs together in our own ways growing up, and we have those shared experiences. And so I would just be curious to know, like, do you also identify token white guy when that's what sometimes people say? Or is it like, do you do that just more so for the blend? Or do you actually wish people would see you as this or that? Or like you said, which I think you do a good job of, is not even thinking about race sometimes in that way, but also just loving through a Christ-fearing heart.
I mean, if you're asking, like, do I care about when people say that? The answer is no.
Right.
I think the practical side of me is like, well, I am 50% white. So in a group of a lot of 100% Asian people, I definitely am the whitest person here. I don't know. I think at this point, I don't really think much about it. Like it's kind of a true statement, and it doesn't like, shape how I view myself in those circumstances. I mean, that's probably a longevity. I do think, looking back, like when I first was kind of like really immersing myself in like this complete Asian friend group in college, where pretty much 100% of the people I hung out with were Asian. I think I felt it more there, but I think it's just a comfort thing, now that I've had those friend groups for so long, that I don't feel uncomfortable by any means.
Remember the podcast you sent me, Wani, like about, remember on the NPR podcast, but like one of the girls that was being interviewed on there, I don't remember the title of all that right now, but she was saying how she was half of two races, and she was angry that she was being identified as the more white perceived of the two, when she actually identified, like she understood what that perceived privilege is, but then at the same time she was like really thinking about what that meant when she's more comfortable in this other setting or this other race as well. And so I guess that was something I was just it made me think about you, because that's when I almost rebuked myself for like putting this veil of whiteness over you when I don't think that was fair for me to do so. And so that was something I was just curious about, because I think in general, like, yes, it's important to be aware of your perceived privilege, but at the same time, it's also important to like empower us to have those reflections of identity. And in this conversation, that identity is racial.
I think the idea makes sense, and probably some people have a stronger opinion on it. I think the reason why I don't really care is because like I don't put a ton of value on like how other people identify me racially. Like I think I value other forms of my identity more, which like might have
athlete.
I was thinking the same thing.
And it might have just been because how I explained. I think it might have just been how I explained myself growing up, that like I was able to morph back and forth. So it might come from kind of like an ignorant place, but at this point, I think it's okay. And like I don't. It's more for me, I think, to just be aware of my own like motivations of how I'm perceived, maybe in like settings outside of my comfortable like close friends. But in terms of how other people view me, I really don't care, to be honest.
How do you view yourself?
I view myself as an Asian person just because that's like my whole life around me. Like my friends are, my wife is.
This isn't you just because people around you.
Yeah, so I think that's what I let off before. Is I don't have like a strong like cultural identity. I think I have a blended identity, just how I grew up. But at this point, like, if I'm filling out one of those forms, like a airline form or something, and it doesn't let me check 2 boxes, I always check Asian. I don't check white.
So on the census.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
So
on
2020 census, are you Asian?
Yeah, for sure. Everything like that, I Asian.
See, like that's actually amazing to me.
I don't know. Like it's, I mean, I don't honestly, in a practical sense, know how I could at this point identify as a white person more than an Asian person. I don't think my cultures are white. I don't think they're Asian either. I just think I kind of am who I am at this point.
I thought you identified culturally as white.
No, I've been thinking about it, and I don't really identify culturally as anything. I just identify culturally as me. Like I have a spiritual identity and other things, but I don't have really cultural identity. So separate from that, I mean, everything else in my life is surrounded by like Asian food is what I prefer. Asian people are who I hang out with. My wife is Asian. I mean, my siblings' friends are kind of everywhere, but a lot of them, I would say, are more so Asian. I don't know. So that my world around me at this point is Asian, and like it hurts me when I see these things Asian, because like in these attacks we're talking about, because I do feel myself identifying with even the people being like attacked and things like that.
I think that's just helpful to know. 2020 census, Asian.
Matt Koller.
I know.
This is a full Asian household.
If I checked maybe on my SAT back in 2006, I'd be curious as to what I put. I'm not sure, but I've put Asian for a long time now on any one of those.
Oh, like you could have put white then.
I don't know.
It's an important starting piece of conversation. We as Asian Americans, we get to share our stories, and clearly we have different stories of where we grew up, how even our identity has formed over the years. And so I think it's just important to share those, and hoping that, some people can relate in different ways. Some people can feel more empowered to explore their own, right? And be able to share your own stories as well. So I'm actually really glad we got to have this conversation where we all felt empowered to speak what was coming from our hearts.
And we discovered that Matt is Asian.
Yeah,
legally
he is Asian.
The latest census.
I think that's wow. Okay, do you get not mad, but when I talk a lot about, your white culture has overpowered my Asian culture or stuff like that, because we've had conversations like that. Well, actually, no, we'll save that for next week, because next time we are going to have a conversation about interracial marriages. And so, what a great place to end, right? Stay tuned because we could
that
talk
was a
about
sneak
this.
peek question.
Exactly. We still have to ask our guests if they will be on for this as well. But yeah, we want to explore interracial or interethnic marriages and just like what it looks like to combine different cultures together when you do come together. And I think Juan has a lot of questions about marriage in general, so he'll be leading it on with a kind of fresh perspective of who and what. And yeah.
Oh, so many. I'm hoping that many juicy things will come out. I'm excited.
I know, right? Well, guys, this has been fun. Matty K, I think you've really spiced it up for us, like that gochujang. Gochugaru. I'm just kidding. It's gochugaru.
Yeah, please say that carefully.
I know. So what was Aaron's thing? I'm Eunjee, and I'm full of Jubilee.
Oh my gosh. My name is Jun Hee, and I have a degree.
I don't remember mine.
I'm Matty K.
Matty K.
And I made us a group
of 3.
Was that what it was?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, because of the rhymes.
Thank you for making this a
Enjoy.
Oh, I forgot that part. Sorry.
Oh, Aaron's gonna be mad. Thanks, guys. We can't wait for you to listen next week or in 2 weeks. I think we do this bi-weekly. Appreciate you.
Bye.
All right. Bye.
A drop in the ocean, a change in the weather. I was praying that you and me might end up together.